The desert heat hit Sarah Martinez like a wall the moment she stepped off the military transport truck. Dust swirled around her boots as she landed on the hard ground of Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The sun blazed overhead without mercy. Sweat already started forming on her forehead under her helmet. She took a deep breath and tasted the dry air mixed with diesel fuel, and something else she could not name. Sarah was not what most people expected when they thought of a soldier. She stood 5 feet and 4 inches tall. Her frame carried 130 pounds of muscle she had worked hard to build. Other soldiers around her looked like giants. Their broad shoulders and thick arms made her feel small. But her brown eyes held something special. There was a fire in them that had burned since childhood. It was the same fire that made her join the army when everyone told her she was too small. She grabbed her heavy pack from the truck bed. The weight made her shoulders strain, but she did not let it show on her face. Around her, male soldiers moved their gear easily. They talked and laughed like they were moving boxes of feathers. Sarah gritted her teeth and lifted her pack onto her shoulders. The straps cut into her skin, but she stood straight. She would not give anyone a reason to doubt her on day one. The base stretched out in front of her like a small city made of tents and concrete barriers. Soldiers walked everywhere with purpose. Some carried weapons. Others moved supplies. The noise was constant. Generators hummed. Vehicles rumbled. People shouted orders across the compound. Sarah had trained for this moment for months, but being here felt different. This was real. This was war. A group of soldiers stood near a cluster of tents watching the new arrivals. Sarah could feel their eyes on her as she walked. Their stares felt heavy. Some looked curious. Others looked skeptical. A few whispered to each other and pointed in her direction. She kept walking with her head up. She had dealt with stares and whispers before. Sergeant Jake Morrison stood with his arms crossed, watching the scene. He was everything Sarah was not. 6 feet tall with shoulders that filled out his uniform perfectly. His arms were thick from years of training and 2 tours in Afghanistan. Scars on his hands told stories of battles fought and won. His blue eyes had seen things that changed men forever. Those same eyes now looked at Sarah with obvious doubt. Jake had been in the Army for 8 years. He joined right out of high school when his hometown had no jobs and no future for a kid like him. The military gave him purpose. It made him strong. It taught him that weakness got people killed. He had learned this lesson the hard way during his first deployment, when a soldier who could not keep up got 3 men wounded in an ambush. Now he watched this small woman struggle with her pack and shook his head. He turned to the soldiers standing nearby. His voice was loud enough for Sarah to hear every word. "Great. They are sending us dead weight now," Jake said. His words cut through the desert air like a knife. "Look at her. She can barely carry her own gear. How is she going to carry a wounded soldier? How is she going to drag someone to safety when the bullets start flying?" The other soldiers looked uncomfortable. Some nodded in agreement. Others stayed quiet. But they all heard what Jake said. Word would spread fast around the base. Sarah Martinez was the small woman who could not pull her weight. Sarah heard every word but kept walking. Her face showed nothing. Inside, anger burned in her chest. She had heard similar words many times before. In basic training, instructors doubted her. In advanced training, other recruits made jokes. Each time she proved them wrong. But this felt different. This was not training. This was real combat where mistakes meant death. "This is not summer camp, Princess," Jake continued. His voice got louder. "People die out here because someone cannot pull their weight. Because someone is too weak when it matters most. I have seen good soldiers die because they had to help someone who should never have been here." Sarah finally reached the tent area where new soldiers were supposed to report. She set down her pack carefully. Her shoulders ached, but she did not rub them. She would not give Jake or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her pain. Instead, she opened her pack and began organizing her gear. Her movements were quick and efficient. Every item had its place. Everything was clean and ready. An older sergeant approached her with a clipboard. His name tag read Wilson. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "You must be Martinez," he said. "Welcome to FOB Phoenix. Do not mind Morrison over there. He is tough on everyone at first, especially the new ones." Sarah looked up from her gear. "Thank you, Sergeant. I am ready to do my job." Wilson smiled slightly. "I am sure you are. Your records show you finished top of your class in several training programs. That does not happen by accident." "No, sir, it does not," Sarah replied. "Morrison over there finished top of his class too. Years ago. Maybe you two have more in common than he thinks." Sarah glanced over at Jake, who was still talking to his group. His gestures were animated as he probably continued to complain about her arrival. Maybe, Sergeant. Time will tell. Wilson handed her the clipboard with housing assignments and duty schedules. Your bunk is in Tent 7. Chow Hall opens at 0500. First briefing is at 0600. Get some rest. Tomorrow the real work begins. As Wilson walked away, Sarah looked around the base one more time. This place would be her home for the next year. These soldiers would be her family whether they wanted her or not. She had worked too hard and come too far to let doubt stop her now. Jake Morrison thought she was dead weight. Soon she would show him and everyone else exactly what she was made of. The sun continued its merciless beat as Sarah picked up her pack and headed toward Tent 7. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would rest and prepare. The fire in her eyes burned a little brighter as she walked away from the stairs in whispers. She had something to prove, and she would prove it one day at a time. Sarah woke up at 4:30 in the morning to the sound of explosions in the distance. Her heart jumped, but the other soldiers in the tent barely moved. This was normal life at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. She lay on her narrow cot for a moment, listening to the sounds of war. Artillery fire echoed across the desert. Helicopters flew overhead with their familiar chopping sound. The base was already alive with activity even before sunrise. She got dressed quickly in the dark. Her uniform was pressed and clean. Her boots were polished until they reflected light. If Jake Morrison was going to find fault with her, it would not be because of her appearance. She folded her blanket with military precision and made her bunk perfectly. Every corner was tight. Every line was straight. The mess hall was crowded with soldiers eating breakfast and drinking coffee. Sarah took her tray and found an empty spot at a long table. The food was basic but hot. Scrambled eggs that came from powder. Bacon that was too salty. Toast that was slightly burned. But it was fuel for the day ahead. She ate quickly and efficiently. Jake Morrison entered the mess hall with his usual group of followers. They were all experienced soldiers who had served multiple tours. They moved with confidence that came from surviving real combat. Jake's eyes found Sarah immediately. He whispered something to his men and they all looked in her direction. A few of them laughed quietly. Sarah ignored them and finished her breakfast. She cleaned her tray and headed to the morning briefing. The briefing room was a large tent filled with folding chairs. Maps covered the walls showing the local area with red marks indicating enemy positions. Captain Williams stood at the front with a serious expression. Intelligence reports show increased enemy activity in Sector 7, the captain announced. We will be running extra patrols for the next week. Stay alert. Stay alive. Any questions? A few soldiers asked about equipment and timing. Jake raised his hand. Sir, what about the new personnel? Are they ready for combat operations? The captain looked directly at Sarah. All personnel assigned to this unit have completed required training. They are here because they earned it. After the briefing, Jake approached Sarah in the hallway outside. His face showed no kindness. Listen, Martinez. The captain has to say those things. But out there in the real world, training does not mean much. I have seen soldiers with perfect scores get people killed because they froze up when bullets started flying. Sarah looked him straight in the eye. I understand your concerns, Sergeant. I am ready to do my job. We will see about that, Jake replied. Today you are coming on patrol with my squad. Try not to get anyone killed. The patrol began 2 hours later. Sarah carried full combat gear, including body armor, helmet, weapon, ammunition, water, and medical supplies. The total weight was over 60 pounds. The other soldiers carried similar loads, but they were bigger and stronger. For Sarah, every step was a challenge, but she kept pace with the group as they moved through the desert terrain. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose above 100 degrees. Sweat poured down inside Sarah's armor. Her legs started to burn with fatigue, but she did not slow down. Jake kept looking back at her, waiting for signs of weakness. She gave him none. They reached a village that intelligence said might contain enemy weapons. The soldiers spread out to search buildings. Jake assigned Sarah to carry extra water and ammunition for the squad. This meant her pack was even heavier than before. Think you can handle that, Princess? Jake asked with a smirk. Yes, Sergeant, Sarah replied without emotion. The search took 3 hours under the blazing sun. They found nothing but had to check every building carefully. Sarah carried her heavy load without complaint. When other soldiers needed water, she shared hers even though it made her own thirst worse. When someone ran low on ammunition, she supplied them from her pack. On the way back to base, Jake decided to test Sarah further. He ordered the squad to do combat drills in the desert heat. They practiced moving under fire, treating wounded soldiers and calling for helicopter support. Each drill was physically demanding. Each one pushed Sarah to her limits. The worst drill involved carrying a wounded dummy soldier for half a mile across rocky ground. The dummy weighed 180 pounds. Sarah had to drag it while staying low to avoid imaginary enemy fire. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned from the heat and exertion. Halfway through the exercise, her legs gave out and she collapsed. Jake stood over her as she lay in the dirt, breathing heavily. The other soldiers gathered around to watch. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Jake announced loudly. "When bullets start flying and lives are on the line, she will fold. Mark my words. Her weakness will get someone killed. She is not strong enough for this job. She never will be." Sarah struggled to her feet. Dust covered her uniform. Sweat stung her eyes. Her whole body shook from exhaustion. But she walked back to the dummy soldier and grabbed it again. She lifted with everything she had left and started dragging it toward the finish line. "What are you doing, Martinez?" Jake called after her. Sarah did not answer. She kept pulling the heavy dummy across the rough ground. Each step was agony. Her hands were bleeding from the rough rope handles. Her legs felt like they might collapse again at any moment. But she did not stop. The other soldiers watched in surprised silence as the small woman who had just fallen down refused to quit. Step by step, she dragged the dummy the remaining distance. Her face was bright red from heat and effort. Her breathing came in short gasps. But she finished the exercise. When she finally reached the end point, Sarah stood up straight and looked directly at Jake. "Exercise complete. Sergeant," she said in a steady voice. Jake stared at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect, but it disappeared quickly. "Lucky finish," he said. "Let us see if you can do that when people are actually shooting at you." That night back at base, Sarah sat on her cot, cleaning her weapon. Her whole body ached. Her hands were bandaged from the rope burns. But inside she felt something growing stronger. Jake Morrison thought today proved she was weak. But Sarah knew better. Today she learned something important about herself. She might fall down, but she would always get back up. And that was something no amount of size or strength could teach. 3 months had passed since Sarah first arrived at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The desert that once felt like an enemy had become familiar territory. She knew every path between the tents. She recognized every sound from the generators to the distant artillery. Most importantly, she had earned her place among the soldiers through sweat, blood, and determination. Sarah had proven herself in small ways first. During a supply run to a nearby village, she spotted suspicious movement that others missed. Her sharp eyes detected 3 men with weapons hiding behind a building. The patrol avoided an ambush because of her warning. When a sandstorm hit the base, Sarah worked for 18 hours straight helping to secure equipment and repair damaged structures. She never complained about the long hours or dangerous conditions. Her weapon skills impressed even the toughest instructors. At the shooting range, Sarah consistently hit targets that other soldiers missed. Her smaller hands gave her better control of the rifle. Her patience allowed her to wait for the perfect shot. During night operations, her ability to move quietly through rough terrain made her valuable for reconnaissance missions. The other soldiers in the squad slowly began to respect her abilities. Private Johnson started asking for her help with equipment maintenance. Corporal Stevens included her in planning discussions for patrol routes. Even Sergeant Wilson began giving her more responsibility during missions. But Jake Morrison remained unconvinced about her capabilities. Jake watched every move Sarah made with critical eyes. When she performed well, he said it was luck. When she struggled with heavy equipment, he pointed it out to everyone. He assigned her to the most difficult guard shifts during the hottest parts of the day. He made her carry extra supplies on every patrol. He pushed her harder than any other soldier in the unit. "She is still weak," Jake told his closest friends. "One good day does not make a soldier. Wait until the real fighting starts. Wait until someone depends on her to save their life. That is when her true nature will show." But Sarah continued to improve with each passing week. She learned to carry heavier loads without showing strain. She mastered the radio equipment faster than soldiers with more experience. During medical training, she proved to have steady hands under pressure. Her instructors noted that she never panicked when treating simulated wounds. The breakthrough moment came during a night patrol in enemy territory. The squad was moving through a dangerous area when they encountered unexpected resistance. Enemy fighters opened fire from multiple positions. In the chaos and darkness, 2 soldiers became separated from the main group. Jake ordered the squad to fall back to safety, but Sarah volunteered to go find the missing men. "Absolutely not," Jake said firmly. "You will get lost or captured. We cannot risk more people for a rescue mission." But Sarah had already studied the area and knew exactly where the soldiers likely took cover. Against direct orders, she slipped away from the group and moved through the darkness alone. She found both men pinned down behind a destroyed vehicle. One was wounded and bleeding from his arm. The other was too scared to move. Sarah provided covering fire while the 2 soldiers escaped to safety. She then followed them back to the main group, moving carefully to avoid detection. The entire rescue took only 20 minutes, but it saved 2 lives. When they returned to base, the rescued soldiers praised Sarah's courage and quick thinking. Captain Williams called Sarah into his office the next morning. She expected punishment for disobeying orders. Instead, the captain smiled and offered her a chair. "That was good work last night, Martinez," he said. "Risky but effective. The kind of decision that separates ordinary soldiers from exceptional ones." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I have something important to discuss with you. We have received orders for a special reconnaissance mission. High priority, high risk. I need soldiers I can trust completely." The captain spread a map across his desk. It showed mountainous terrain about 50 miles from the base. Red marks indicated known enemy positions. A blue circle marked their target area. Intelligence reports that enemy forces are using this ridge to move supplies and weapons. We need eyes on the ground to confirm their activities. The mission requires a small team to establish an observation post and gather information for 48 hours. Sarah studied the map carefully. The target area was deep in hostile territory with limited escape routes. The terrain looked difficult even for experienced climbers. "It will be dangerous," the captain continued. "The team will be completely on their own. No backup, no support. If something goes wrong, extraction could take hours or even days." "I understand, sir." "Good. The team leaves tomorrow night. 8 soldiers total. Morrison will be the squad leader. You will be part of his team." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. A 2-day mission alone with Jake Morrison in enemy territory. This would be the ultimate test of whether she truly belonged with combat soldiers. That afternoon, the selected team gathered in the briefing room for detailed mission planning. Jake stood at the front with maps and photographs spread across a table. He looked serious as he explained the route they would take and the timeline for the operation. "This mission requires absolute precision," Jake said. "One mistake could get us all killed or captured. Everyone must perform perfectly under extreme pressure." He looked directly at Sarah as he spoke the next words. "There is no room for weakness or hesitation. Lives will depend on every person doing their job exactly right. The enemy knows this terrain better than we do. They will be looking for us. If anyone cannot handle that level of responsibility, speak up now." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I am ready, Sergeant." Jake studied her face for several seconds. Finally, he nodded. "We will see about that, Martinez. We will definitely see about that." As the briefing ended and soldiers began preparing their equipment, Jake pulled Sarah aside. His expression was harder than she had ever seen it. "Listen carefully, Martinez. This is not another training exercise. This is real combat in enemy territory. Try not to get us all killed out there. Real soldiers are counting on you not to screw this up." Sarah simply nodded and walked away to prepare her gear. Tomorrow night would determine once and for all whether she was truly ready for war. The mission would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about herself. Jake Morrison thought she would fail under pressure. Soon they would both find out if he was right. The night air was cold as the 8-soldier team prepared to leave forward operating base Phoenix. Sarah checked her equipment one final time under the dim red lights that would not interfere with their night vision. Her rifle was clean and loaded. Her radio worked perfectly. Her medical kit contained everything needed for emergency treatment. She carried extra water and ammunition just like the other soldiers. Jake Morrison stood near the helicopter landing zone, giving final instructions to the team. His voice was serious and professional. This mission was different from their usual patrols. They would be completely alone in dangerous territory for 2 full days. No backup would be available if things went wrong. "Remember the extraction point," Jake said, pointing to his map. "If we get separated, everyone knows where to meet. If someone gets hurt, we carry them out together. No one gets left behind." The helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. It was a Black Hawk painted in dark colors for night operations. The pilot wore night vision goggles and spoke quietly into his radio. The crew chief helped the soldiers load their gear and climb aboard. Sarah sat between Corporal Stevens and Private Johnson. Both men had become her friends during the past 3 months. They no longer doubted her abilities like they did when she first arrived. Stevens even asked her advice about patrol tactics because she noticed details that others missed. "You nervous, Martinez?" Stevens asked as the helicopter lifted off. "A little," Sarah admitted, "but ready." "Good. Nervous keeps you alive. Too confident gets you killed." The flight took 40 minutes over dark mountains and desert valleys. Sarah looked out the window at the landscape below. Everything looked different in the green glow of her night vision goggles. The terrain was rough and rocky with deep canyons and steep ridges. Perfect country for an ambush if enemy fighters discovered their position. The helicopter landed briefly at the insertion point to drop off the team. The soldiers moved quickly away from the landing zone before the aircraft took off again. Within seconds, they were alone in enemy territory with only the sound of wind through the rocks. Jake used hand signals to organize the team for movement. Sarah took her assigned position in the middle of the formation. Her job was to watch for threats on the left side while they moved. Everyone wore night vision equipment that made the darkness bright green, but they still had to move carefully to avoid making noise. The march to their observation post took 3 hours. They climbed through rocky terrain that would have been difficult even in daylight. Sarah's smaller size became an advantage as they moved through narrow passages between boulders. She could squeeze through gaps that larger soldiers had trouble navigating. Twice during the approach, Sarah spotted potential dangers that others missed. The first was old tripwire that could have triggered an alarm if someone walked into it. She signaled Jake, who carefully marked the location for the team to avoid. The second was fresh footprints in soft ground that suggested enemy patrols used this route recently. Jake examined the footprints with his flashlight covered by a red filter. The prints were maybe 6 hours old based on how the edges looked. Someone had walked this way during the day carrying heavy equipment. "Good eyes, Martinez," Jake whispered. This was the first time he had praised her work without adding criticism. They reached the observation post just before dawn. The position was perfect for watching the valley below where intelligence reports said enemy fighters moved supplies at night. The team had clear views in all directions, but was hidden from anyone looking up from the valley floor. Jake organized the soldiers into teams for rotating watch duties. Each pair would observe for 4 hours while others rested. Sarah was paired with Sergeant Thompson, an experienced soldier who taught her advanced surveillance techniques. "The key is patience," Thompson explained as they settled behind their observation equipment. "Watch everything. Write down everything, even small details might be important later." As the sun rose over the mountains, Sarah began her first watch duty. She used binoculars and spotting scopes to examine every building and path in the valley below. A few local farmers worked in small fields. Children played near their homes. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but Sarah noticed things that seemed unusual. 3 buildings had fresh sandbags around their walls. Several pickup trucks were parked in places that provided good cover from air attacks. Power lines had been cut in certain areas, but not others. These details suggested military activity hidden among the civilian population. During her first 4-hour shift, Sarah documented everything she saw. Vehicle movements, people walking between buildings, changes in activity patterns as the day progressed. She drew detailed sketches of important locations and noted exact times for everything. When Thompson took over the observation duties, he was impressed by Sarah's thorough notes. "This is excellent work," he said quietly. "You caught details I would have missed. Command will definitely want to see this information." Jake rotated between all the observation teams during the first day. When he checked Sarah's position, she showed him her notes and sketches. His expression was serious as he studied her work. "You identified that weapons cache," Jake said, pointing to one of her drawings. "Those buildings are definitely being used for military supplies." "How did you know?" "The trucks never stay long enough for normal deliveries," Sarah explained. "They arrive empty and leave heavy based on how the suspension looks. But no civilian goods come out of those buildings. That means they are storing something else inside." Jake nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Good observation." As the second night fell, enemy activity in the valley increased dramatically. Vehicles moved without lights between buildings. People carried equipment that looked like weapons. Sarah counted at least 30 fighters moving through areas that appeared empty during the day. The team was gathering exactly the intelligence that command needed, but Sarah noticed something troubling. Enemy patrols were moving closer to their position. Several times during the night, armed men walked near the bottom of their ridge. It seemed like they were searching for something. "I think they know we are here," Sarah whispered to Jake during a brief conversation. "Why do you think that?" Jake asked. "Their patrol patterns changed. Yesterday they moved randomly. Tonight they are searching systematically. Someone told them to look for observers." Jake considered this information carefully. If enemy forces knew about their mission, the extraction could become very dangerous. But they still had important work to finish before leaving. "We stick to the plan," Jake decided. 6 more hours until extraction. We can handle whatever comes." But as dawn approached, Sarah's fears proved correct. Enemy fighters were definitely closing in on their position. The first explosion came without warning, just as the sun began to rise over the mountain ridge. Sarah was writing her final observations in a notebook when the world suddenly erupted in fire and flying rocks. An enemy rocket-propelled grenade struck the boulder where Corporal Stevens had been keeping watch. The massive stone split apart with a thunderous crack that echoed across the valley. Sarah threw herself flat against the ground as debris rained down around her. Sharp pieces of rock cut through her uniform and scraped against her helmet. The smell of explosives filled the air along with dust that made it hard to see or breathe. Her ears rang from the explosion, but she could still hear Jake Morrison shouting orders somewhere nearby. "Contact left. Contact right. We are surrounded." Jake's voice carried across their position despite the chaos. "Stevens is down." Johnson moved to cover the north side. Automatic weapon fire erupted from 3 different directions at once. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves around the American observation post during the night. They had waited for daylight to launch their attack when the soldiers would be tired from staying awake on guard duty. The ambush was perfectly planned and executed. Sarah crawled behind a large rock that provided some protection from the bullets flying overhead. She could see muzzle flashes from enemy weapons about 200 meters down the slope. At least a dozen fighters were shooting at their position with rifles and machine guns. More enemies were probably moving closer under cover of the heavy gunfire. Private Johnson was pinned down behind inadequate cover 20 meters away. Bullets struck the rocks around him, sending sparks and stone fragments in all directions. He tried to return fire but had to keep his head down to avoid being shot. His position was completely exposed to enemies attacking from the east side. Sergeant Thompson had taken cover in a small depression that protected him from direct fire. But Sarah could see that enemy fighters were moving to surround his position. In a few minutes he would be trapped with no way to escape. The experienced soldier was calm under fire, but his situation was becoming desperate. Jake Morrison had positioned himself behind the largest boulder where he could coordinate the defense. His radio crackled with static as he tried to call for help from the base. But something was wrong with the communications equipment. Either the radio was damaged by the explosion or enemy jammers were blocking their signals. "Martinez," Jake shouted across the battlefield. "Can you reach Thompson's position? He needs ammunition." Sarah looked at the open ground between her cover and where Thompson was trapped. Enemy bullets were cutting through the air in constant streams. Any movement would draw immediate attention from multiple shooters. But Thompson was running out of ammunition and would be defenseless without help. She grabbed extra magazines from her pack and prepared to make the dangerous run. The distance was only 30 meters, but it might as well have been 30 miles. Sarah took several deep breaths and studied the enemy firing patterns. There might be a brief moment when she could move safely. Before she could start running, another explosion rocked their position. This time the enemy rocket struck even closer to Jake's location. The blast threw dirt and rocks in all directions. When the dust cleared, Sarah saw that Jake was no longer behind his protective boulder. He had been thrown down the rocky slope by the force of the explosion. His body lay motionless among the jagged stones about 40 meters below their defensive position. Blood was already pooling beneath his torn uniform. The man who had called her dead weight now needed someone to save his life. Sergeant Wilson took command after Jake went down. He was older and more cautious than Jake, but equally experienced in combat. His voice stayed calm even as their situation became more desperate. "We need to establish communications," Wilson ordered. "Someone has to reach higher ground where the radio will work. We need extraction immediately." But the enemy was closing in from all sides. Sarah could see fighters moving through the rocks below their position. Others were climbing up from the valley to attack from different angles. The Americans were outnumbered at least 3-1 and running low on ammunition. Private Johnson tried to move to a better position, but enemy fire drove him back to inadequate cover. A bullet grazed his shoulder and blood started soaking through his sleeve. He was still fighting but clearly hurt and losing strength. "Johnson is hit," Thompson reported over the noise of gunfire. "He needs medical attention." Sarah looked down at Jake's motionless form lying among the rocks. The squad leader who had doubted her from the beginning was bleeding and possibly dying while enemy fighters moved closer to their position. Every instinct told her to stay behind cover and protect herself, but something stronger drove her to action. The team medic was treating another wounded soldier and could not leave his patient. Thompson was still pinned down and out of ammunition. Wilson was coordinating their defense and calling desperately for helicopter support. Nobody else could help Jake Morrison except the soldier he had called too weak for combat duty. Sarah checked her weapon and made sure she had enough ammunition for what came next. She studied the terrain between her position and where Jake lay wounded. The route would take her through open ground under direct enemy fire. Many larger and stronger soldiers would not attempt such a dangerous rescue mission, but Sarah Martinez had not come this far and endured so much doubt just to watch a fellow soldier die. She had something to prove to Jake Morrison and to herself. The small woman who had been called dead weight was about to show everyone what she was really made of. The enemy gunfire intensified as more fighters joined the attack. Bullets struck rocks all around Sarah's hiding place. She could hear Wilson on the radio finally making contact with base operations. "This is Wolfpack 6, Wilson transmitted. "We need immediate extraction. Multiple casualties. Enemy forces closing on our position." But Sarah knew that help was at least 20 minutes away. Jake Morrison did not have 20 minutes. He needed help right now from the only person who could reach him. The person he thought was too weak to save anyone. Sarah Martinez was about to prove him wrong in the most dangerous way possible. Sarah took one final look at Jake Morrison lying motionless among the jagged rocks below. Blood continued spreading beneath his body armor, creating a dark stain on the desert stones. His face was pale and his breathing looked shallow even from 40 meters away. If she was going to save his life, she had to move now before he lost too much blood. Enemy bullets whistled overhead as Sarah prepared for the most dangerous moment of her military career. She studied every rock, every depression, every possible piece of cover between her position and where Jake lay wounded. The route would take her through completely open ground where enemy fighters could shoot at her from multiple directions. She checked her rifle one more time and made sure the safety was off. Her medical kit was secured to her belt where she could reach it quickly. Everything else would have to be left behind to move as fast as possible. Speed and surprise were her only advantages against the overwhelming enemy firepower. Sarah whispered a quick prayer and broke from cover without warning anyone else. She knew that Wilson and the other soldiers would try to stop her if they realized what she planned to do. This rescue mission was so dangerous that any reasonable person would call it suicide. The first 10 meters went smoothly as Sarah ran and slid down the rocky slope. Her small size allowed her to move quickly through spaces between boulders that would slow down larger soldiers. Enemy fighters were focused on the main American position and did not immediately notice one person moving alone. But halfway to Jake's location, an enemy shooter spotted her movement. Bullets began striking the rocks around Sarah's feet as she scrambled across loose stones. The distinctive crack of rifle fire followed by the whine of ricochets filled the air. She dove behind a fallen boulder just as automatic weapons joined the attack. Sarah was now trapped in no man's land between the two fighting forces. Enemy bullets came from her left and right sides while American covering fire passed overhead toward the attackers. She was caught in the middle of a deadly crossfire with nowhere to hide except behind one small rock. But she could see Jake clearly now, and his condition was worse than she feared. Blood flowed from a head wound where flying debris had cut his scalp. His left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, suggesting broken bones. Most seriously, dark red blood was spreading across his chest from what looked like internal injuries. Sarah knew she had only minutes to reach Jake before blood loss made survival impossible. She studied the remaining distance and chose the fastest route, even though it meant exposing herself to concentrated enemy fire. There was no safe way to complete this rescue mission, so she might as well be bold about it. A brief pause in the shooting gave Sarah her chance. She sprinted from behind her cover rock and ran directly toward Jake's position. Enemy fighters immediately opened fire, but Sarah was moving too fast and unpredictably for accurate shots. Bullets struck the ground behind her as she leaped between rocks and slid down steep sections. She reached Jake with bullets still flying all around them. Up close, his injuries looked even more serious than she expected. His breathing was rapid and shallow, which meant shock from blood loss. His pulse felt weak and irregular, but his eyes were open and focused when he saw Sarah beside him. "Martinez," Jake whispered through blood that had gathered in his mouth. "What are you doing here?" "Get back to safety." "Not without you, Sergeant," Sarah replied as she began examining his wounds. "Stay still and let me work." The chest wound was the most dangerous immediate threat. Blood bubbled from a hole in Jake's body armor where shrapnel had penetrated between the protective plates. Sarah quickly opened her medical kit and found the supplies needed for treating penetrating chest wounds. She cut away Jake's torn uniform to expose the injury. Blood flowed steadily from a puncture that had probably damaged internal organs. Sarah applied pressure bandages and then used emergency medical tape to create an airtight seal. This would prevent air from entering the chest cavity and collapsing Jake's lung. "Can you feel your legs?" Sarah asked while working on the wound. "Yes. Everything hurts, but I can move," Jake answered weakly. "Good. No spinal damage then. We need to get you out of here before you lose more blood." But moving Jake would be the hardest part of the rescue. He weighed at least 70 pounds more than Sarah, and the route back to safety was all uphill over rough terrain. Even healthy soldiers would struggle to carry someone that heavy across such difficult ground. Sarah looked around for materials to help with moving Jake. She found a torn piece of canvas from military equipment and some rope that had been scattered by the explosion. Working quickly while bullets continued flying overhead, she fashioned a makeshift stretcher that would allow her to drag Jake rather than trying to carry his full weight. "This is going to hurt," Sarah warned as she prepared to move Jake onto the improvised stretcher. "But staying here will hurt worse." Jake gritted his teeth as Sarah carefully rolled him onto the canvas. Even gentle movement caused intense pain from his broken ribs and internal injuries. But he stayed conscious and helped as much as possible by using his good arm to hold onto the makeshift stretcher. The journey back to safety began with Sarah pulling Jake's weight up the steep rocky slope. Every step was a struggle against gravity, rough terrain, and enemy gunfire. Her muscles burned with effort as she dragged the heavy load between boulders and over loose stones that shifted under their combined weight. Enemy fighters realized what was happening and focused their fire on the rescue attempt. Bullets struck rocks near Sarah's head as she pulled Jake toward cover. One shot grazed her left arm, tearing through her sleeve and leaving a bloody groove in her skin. But she did not stop moving despite the pain and bleeding. Sergeant Wilson and the other soldiers provided covering fire to help protect the rescue effort. They shot at enemy positions to force the attackers to keep their heads down. But ammunition was running low, and the Americans could not maintain heavy fire much longer. 20 meters from safety, Sarah's strength began to fail. The combination of Jake's weight, the rough terrain, and her own wound was taking a severe toll. Her legs shook with exhaustion and she had to stop several times to catch her breath. "Leave me here, Martinez," Jake said weakly. "You have done enough. Save yourself." "Not happening, Sergeant," Sarah replied through gritted teeth. "We started this together and we finish it together." Sarah ignored the burning pain in her wounded arm and pulled Jake Morrison the final 20 meters to safety behind the protective rocks. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and her lungs burned from breathing the dusty air, mixed with gunpowder smoke. Blood from the bullet grazed on her arm soaked through her torn sleeve, but she had not stopped moving for even 1 second during the entire rescue. The other soldiers rushed to help as soon as Sarah dragged Jake behind cover. Sergeant Wilson immediately began checking Jake's vital signs, while Private Johnson applied fresh bandages to the worst wounds. The makeshift stretcher that Sarah had created was soaked with blood, but it had saved Jake's life by allowing her to move him quickly across the dangerous terrain. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Wilson said as he worked on Jake's injuries. "I cannot believe you pulled this off. That was the bravest thing I have ever seen in combat." Jake's eyes found Sarah through his pain and exhaustion. His face was pale from blood loss, but his expression showed something she had never seen before: respect, gratitude, and maybe even a little shame for all the months he had doubted her. "Abilities, Martinez," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the continuing gunfire. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. You did not just save my life. You carried all of us today." Before Sarah could respond, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the mountainside. Two Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, their door gunners already firing at enemy positions below. The cavalry had finally arrived, but Sarah's heroic rescue had bought them the precious time Jake needed to survive his injuries. The helicopter crews worked with military precision to extract the wounded team. Sarah helped load Jake onto a medical stretcher, while the aircraft's guns provided covering fire against the remaining enemy fighters. His blood pressure was dangerously low and his breathing remained shallow. But the field medic said he would make it to the hospital alive. As the helicopter lifted off with Jake and the other wounded soldiers, Sarah remained behind with Wilson and two others to secure the observation post. The mission was not complete until all their intelligence reports were safely transmitted back to headquarters. Even after her heroic rescue under fire, Sarah insisted on finishing the job they had come to do. It took another 6 hours before a second helicopter arrived to extract the remaining soldiers. During that time, Sarah continued performing her duties despite her own injuries and exhaustion. She helped Wilson compile their surveillance reports. She assisted with destroying sensitive equipment that could not be left behind. She maintained security watches to prevent another enemy attack. Only when they were finally airborne and heading back to base did Sarah allow herself to rest. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the rescue mission was fading, leaving her aware of every ache and pain in her body. But inside she felt something new and powerful, the absolute knowledge that she belonged here with these soldiers. The story of Sarah's rescue spread quickly throughout Forward Operating Base Phoenix. By the time their helicopter landed, soldiers were already gathering to hear details of what happened during the ambush. Word traveled fast in the military community, especially stories of extraordinary courage under fire. Captain Williams was waiting on the landing zone when Sarah stepped off the aircraft. His expression showed the kind of respect usually reserved for decorated war heroes. "Martinez, that was exceptional work out there," the captain said. Sergeant Wilson's radio report described the most courageous action he has witnessed in 15 years of military service. "You saved Morrison's life at great risk to your own." "Just doing my job, sir," Sarah replied, though her voice carried new confidence. "That was far beyond the call of duty. I am recommending you for the Silver Star. Your actions today represent the highest traditions of military service." Jake Morrison spent 3 weeks in the military hospital recovering from his injuries. The internal bleeding had been stopped in time, but his broken ribs and other wounds required multiple surgeries. During his long recovery, he had plenty of time to think about what Sarah Martinez had done for him on that mountain ridge. When Jake was finally released from the hospital, the first person he wanted to see was Sarah. He found her at the shooting range where she was training new soldiers who had recently arrived at the base. Her instruction was patient and thorough, helping nervous recruits develop the skills they would need to survive combat. "Martinez," Jake called as she finished working with a young private. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah walked over to where Jake stood leaning on crutches. His left arm was still in a sling and he moved carefully to avoid straining his healing ribs. But his eyes were clear and strong as he looked at the soldier who had saved his life. "I need to say something that is long overdue," Jake began. "From the day you arrived here, I doubted you. I called you deadweight. I made your life difficult because I thought you were not strong enough for this job. I was completely wrong about everything." Sarah listened without interrupting as Jake continued speaking. "You are not deadweight. You never were. You are one of the strongest soldiers I have ever served with. Not because of your size or physical strength, but because of what is inside you. Your courage, your determination, your refusal to quit when everyone else would have given up." Jake paused and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "You carried me off that mountain when I was helpless. But more than that, you have been carrying this whole unit with your example. You showed all of us what it really means to be a soldier, what it means to never leave anyone behind." 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood at attention in front of hundreds of soldiers and family members at the medal ceremony. Jake Morrison was beside her, fully recovered from his injuries and back to active duty. He had insisted on being present to see Sarah receive the Silver Star for her extraordinary heroism. When the general pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform, Jake felt pride swell in his chest. This small woman, who he had once dismissed as weak, had become one of the finest soldiers he had ever known. She had proven that true strength comes not from size or physical power, but from the courage to do what is right when it matters most. As the ceremony ended and people congratulated Sarah on her award, Jake pulled her aside for a private moment. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said with a smile. "What is that, Sergeant?" "You were never dead weight. You were the one strong enough to carry us all." Sarah Martinez stood tall in her dress uniform with the silver star gleaming on her chest. The doubters had been proven wrong. The weak had become strong. And the soldier who was supposed to be dead weight had shown everyone what it truly means to never leave anyone behind.